Here we are, chapter 19. We are looking at union organizing campaigns and collective bargaining. I know you're like, goodness, how much unions seem to be a large presence in this textbook. They are. It's important to be able to see how much of an influence unions and their role play within the country, individual states, as well as their impact on an organization. And it's important for you to know whether you're going to be a manager or an employer manager. You need to know how they play in a role and how they impact you as well as your employees. So let's go ahead and jump in. By the end of the chapter, you should be able to define collective bargaining, explain the captive audience doctrine, define bargaining unit, certification, recognition, contract bars, good faith bargaining, Bowlerism, mediation, check-off, seniority, and lockout and strike. So collective bargaining. It involves negotiation, drafting, administration, and interpretation of a written agreement between you as an employer and the employee, and as the union for a specific period of time. So the union is representing the employees, and you have this agreement that has now been designed, and the time can be a year, a couple of years, or longer. And there's various components that make up this process. The negotiation of relevant issues in good faith by the management and union, the incorporation of both parties' understandings are outlined in a written contract. The daily working relationships are administered according to terms and conditions of employment specified in the contract, and all disputes are resolved and broken down in interpretation of terms through established procedures that are agreed upon by both parties. There are some primary factors that influence your decision to join, how your wages are impacted, the benefits, your working conditions, and your job security. Those are the four key. Some other factors could be having better communication with management, higher quality of management and supervision, increased democracy in the workplace, so it's not a forced down from the top kind of concept, where you can actually have a sense of autonomy and make certain decisions, and it's not ruling with an iron fist. There's an opportunity to belong to a group where you can have some shared experiences and camaraderie. Reasons for not joining. You shouldn't join, and why most people don't join if they choose not to is because their wages are great. They've got great benefits, amazing working conditions, stable job security. That's a reason not to join. There's a negative image tied to it. And then, of course, there can be a sense of abuse of power. So here's some organizational practices to avoid unionization. Creating a procedure for handling employee complaints, eliminating arbitrary and heavy-handed management practices, establishing a meaningful system of a two-way communication within your organization, eliminating the job security threat. Stop making employees feel like they're going to lose their job. Making employees feel that they're part of the organization. They're not just a number. They're not just a little keg, but they are actually members of this great family. They're actually stakeholders. They're actually owners of. Make them feel like they're part of it. And guess what? You can actually help to avoid unionization. A union organizing campaign begins when you have one or more employees that request the union to begin this campaign. NLRB requests that an election be supervised. This rarely approves exceptions to the general rules for oral solicitation and distribution of union literature. The captive audience doctrine is where you as the manager have the right to speak against a union to employees on company time, and to require employees to attend the meeting. Right? That is what the doctrine says. You can speak against the union on company time and require them to attend the meeting. A bargaining union, if you have a group of employees in a plant, firm, or industry that is considered suitable for collective bargaining, it should be recognized by the employer, agreed by both parties, or approved by the NLRB. The NLRB is responsible for establishing the bargaining union. There has to be consent to elections where the parties have agreed on the appropriate bargaining union, and there has to be community of interest where the NLRB makes a bargaining union decision based on areas of employee commonality. When we look at unfair labor practices, this is where there's any kind of threats, violence, threat of violence, any interference from the employer toward union organizers. If the employer interferes with you trying to organize a union drive, if there's any discipline or discharge because you participated in any pro-union activities, or if you were threatened or coerced by union organizers. Informational picketing is patrolling at or near your workplace, carrying any kind of signs to publicize that the union is requesting an election, to become the bargaining agent for the employees of the organization. GISL bargaining orders is where an NLRB orders management to bargain with the union. It's named after a landmark Supreme Court decision, NLRB versus the GISL Packing Company. Please do an online search and read more about that. We have a 12-month rule that covers our election certification and decertification, that it provides that no election can be held in any bargaining union within which a valid election has been held the preceding 12 months before. So you can't, you have to wait until 12 months have elapsed. You cannot, try to jump back in 6 months, 8 months. There's a certification bar, recognition bar, and a contract bar doctrine. Under the certification bar, it's where NLRB will not permit another election during the 12 months of their certification. In the recognition bar, it's when the NLRB prohibits an election for up to 12 months after an employer voluntarily recognizes a union. And in the contract bar, it's when the NLRB will not permit an election in the bargaining unit covered by a contract until the contract expires, and that can be up to 3 years max. Now, to get this union organizing campaign underway, there's contact with employees of the organization. You garner their signatures on authorization cards. You need at least 30% of employees that you're trying to represent. The union or employer requests representation election from NLRB. That examiner then determines if 30% of employees have actually signed those cards and if there's an appropriate bargaining unit. There's an election campaign and then a secret ballot election. The union that receives more than 50% of the vote is certified as an exclusive bargaining unit, or bargaining agent, and the employer remains non-union when the union did not receive 50% of the votes. You have to have 50% or more. Under good faith bargaining, it's really where both parties are sincerely negotiating their differences, trying to reach a mutually acceptable agreement. Bullerism is what happens when management makes its best offer at the outset of the bargaining, right up front, and they firmly adhere to the offer throughout the bargaining sessions, and it's named after the GE vice president. And NLRB does not consider it as a good faith bargaining, so it's considered illegal. Right? So here's going, which is interesting that it's named after the VP, but it has like a bullish kind of vibe to it. Employers' role in negotiations, where a representative of a single company meets with the union rep and they negotiate a contract. In certain industries may opt for multi-employer agreements. In large organizations, very large organizations, you'll have a master agreement on that covers wage and benefit issues, and those are negotiated with the corporate officials and either the national or international union official. The role of a union in negotiations is coordinated bargaining. You have several unions that bargain jointly with a single employer, and then smaller companies that have unions will work closely with the field rep of that union. In large companies, the top officials will conduct negotiations. Third parties play a role in negotiations as well. You have NLRA, which requires both unions and management to bargain in good faith. FLRA will investigate any unfair labor practice charges. They'll have hearings on unfair labor practice, and they'll also issue orders to cease from unfair labor practices. FSIP will provide authority to recommend solutions to resolve an impasse that takes place during to help resolve a dispute. And then we look at our FMCS, and that is an independent agency that's within the federal government that provides mediators to help with contract negotiation impasses. And mediation has a third party who is neutral. That person is a mediator, and they come in to help also resolve contract impasses. They have no authority to impose a solution on either party. Arbitration is binding on both parties, and that's where you agree to settle a dispute through the use of this third party who is called an arbitrator. They have a conventional interest arbitration where they listen to both sides and then they make a decision that is legally binding. And it could be identical to the different positions. It can be different from the positions of either party. And then you have the final offer interest arbitration where as the arbitrator is restricted to only selecting the final offer of one of the parties. So they have to choose. The results from the bargaining process and under the collective bargaining governs the relations between employer and employees for a specific period of time, and it specifies the mutual agreement that was reached during negotiations, and this is done so in writing. We have some specific issues. There's 5 that take place in that you look at in collective bargaining, and that's our dispute resolution, any rights that you have based on seniority within the organization, wages and benefits, management rights, and union security. Under management rights, management can retain the right to direct all business activities, including the workforce, determination of the size of the workforce and how many employees can be hired or laid off, and the class of employees that can be hired or laid off. So it could be your frontline, mid-level, senior, so on and so forth. They can also set working hours and assign work. Your union is looking at security based on the status of employee membership in the union to ensure that they have continuous strength. If those numbers get low, then they can't maintain the 50% or more representation that they need. The union shop is a provision that requires all employees in the unit to join the union and retain membership as a condition of employment. Most right-to-work laws outlaw the union shop. Under union security also, you have the agency shop. That is a provision in the contract that does not require employees to join the union, but requires them to pay the equivalent of union dues as a condition of employment. So at that point, you might as well just join, right? Under maintenance of membership, the contract provision does not require an employee to join the union, and it requires employees who join to remain members for a stipulated time period. Now, I will say, when we go back to this, agency shop, if I don't want to be in a union, why am I having to pay union dues? I don't want to. If I wanted to, then I'd be part of the union, right? So, under checkoff, it's an arrangement between the employer and union under which the employer agrees to withhold and submit to the union all dues, initiation fees, assessments from employee paychecks. COLA, and it's not what you drink, it's the cost of living adjustments, and that's a provision that's in our contracts that ties wage increases to rises in the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index. So if the cost of living goes up or goes down, that our wages are tied to that. Table 19.2 looks at the definitions of typical supplementary pay items. So if there's a shift differential pay, that is a bonus that's paid for working less desirable hours of work. Reporting pay is when you're given pay for um, reporting for work as scheduled, but you find once you get there that there's no work available. Call in or callback pay is when you've been called in or called back to work at some time other than your regular scheduled hours. You're paid for it. Temporary transfer pay is given when you're temporarily transferred to another job, but if the transfer is at a lower paying job, then normally you continue to receive what your old rate is. If it's a higher paying job, then you're usually paid at the higher rate. Under the hazardous duty pay, you're given for performing jobs that are considered risky to your health and safety. Job-related expenses, of course, you're getting compensated for travel, work clothes, tools, whatever is needed for the job. Then you look at seniority rights. That's your individual security. And that's looking at how long you've worked for an employer. And these systems are designed to benefit those who've worked the longest for the company. We look at dispute resolution. There's a no strike clause that pledges the union to cooperate in preventing work stoppages. It's unconditional and it bans any interference with production during the life of a contract. And there's conditional pledges that permit strikes under certain conditions. There's an assurance that a union seeks from the company not to engage in lockouts, and that's where you refuse to let your employees work, right? So if you're not gonna fall in line with what I want, then I'm gonna keep you guys from working. If I keep you from working, you won't earn a wage. If you don't earn a wage, you can't provide for your family, so on and so forth. So when we have an impasse in the collective bargaining process, after the end of a contract period, if there's a new agreement that hasn't been reached, either the employee can continue working under the terms of the old contract until a new one is reached, or you end up having a strike, which is what we mentioned in Chapter 18, is where you refuse to work. There's various trends that we find in collective bargaining, changes with technology, increased use of automation, government relations are constantly changing, foreign competition is increasing, there's a decrease in the percentage of blue-collar employees, especially if you look in the northern regions of our country, coal areas, areas that we had a lot of industrial plants are shutting down, and there's higher rates of unemployment. So you look at that, and there's this new form that is being established where we have a joint labor management committee that will meet regularly, and they examine external events and potential problem areas. You bring in outside experts to make final decisions on various issues, and those that attend the meetings are encouraged to take a problem-solving approach rather than an adversarial one. How can we reach a solution? This is not about us fighting, but how can we reach a solution at the end of the day? And then we look at productivity bargaining, where there's a contract that the union agrees to exchange old work procedures for new ones and ones that are more effective in return for gains in pay and working conditions. And then there's the atmosphere is created of ongoing cooperation, where changes that are called for in an agreement can then be implemented. When you look at take-back bargaining, this is where you ask the union to make concessions on wages and benefits. And this has been incorporated in industries that have suffered due to a lot of foreign competition. So that is the end of Chapter 19. If we had read our chapters from 1 to 19, this would be the end of the book. So that is the end. That's covering everything as far as dealing with labor and employee relations on this end. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Please, please, please take a moment to do an online search of a lot of these legal cases and the various acts and laws that have been passed over the last 200 years. And I look forward to discussing this further with you in the class. Have a wonderful day.